Olá a todos, boa tarde. Meu nome é Rita Faden, sou presidente da FLAD, que é a Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, e temos aqui mais uma sessão do Meet the Author. Agora, em inglês. Hello everyone, welcome to FLAD. It's always a pleasure to have you here. My name is Rita Faden, I'm FLAD's president, and FLAD is a private Portuguese foundation dedicated to the development of Portugal through the bilateral cooperation with the United States. And so we have been having this program, Meet the Author, where FLADs brings to Portugal, to Lisbon, some of the great American authors, where we have the opportunity to talk to them and also to, in the end, to engage in a conversation. And so today I would like first to thank Asa Leia, our partner in the organization and which publishes Bret Easton Ellis in Portugal. And of course, Isabel Lucas, which is the journalist that works with FLAD and help us organize these events, and that she will be the one that will be present in the conversation. And now I think what all you want to hear is Bret Easton Ellis, and so I bring you the famous Bret Easton Ellis to Portugal. Thank you so much.
Oh,
is this mic is on? Yes, it is.
I have my mic over here. I was looking for that.
Lisbon.
It's first time in Lisbon?
First time in Lisbon. My last time in Lisbon.
Really?
I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever be able to write another book again. I don't know if I'm going to ever go on a book tour again. But at least I got to Lisbon. And at least I got to see Lisbon.
You arrived last Friday?
Friday, yes.
And
Friday.
so far so good?
Yes, I got to see rain. We never get to see rain in LA. And I saw a lot of rain over the weekend. And it was lovely. So it was really nice. I couldn't go out. I couldn't really do anything, but it was lovely. It was nice. To remind it that there's weather. Though I hear the weather here is mild, much like Los Angeles. No,
yes, it rains more, like you have seen.
Oh.
So.
Yes.
Are we relaxed now? I'm not.
No,
but
I'm
very
not
nervous,
either.
I have to say.
It's always nervous. It's always in front of an audience, no matter how large or how small. It's always a little, it's nerve-wracking. You're exhibiting yourself.
Yeah.
And, you're trying to be authentic. You're trying to be real. But it's hard to do it in this sort of situation. You don't want to be too performative. You want to just be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when you look at this and the situation, it's not so authentic to a degree, It's sort of like we're on a stage, here's an audience, there's a terrible picture of me in the back on some sort of thing. That must be like 10 years old.
And behind you...
I actually should be flattered. I like that picture. But
and behind
anyway.
you also, yes.
Oh, yes, that picture. Yes, this was taken 8 years ago, okay? Just so you know. But anyway, I'm fine. And I think as we begin our conversation, I think we will become more relaxed and it will be okay.
But we are here in a real situation. You have written a book, a novel, your last novel in 13 years, Shards. Tell us a little bit, because the book, it's about Bret at 17. You mentioned the real Bret. What are the real Bret now behind this audience and something? When you think of real Bret, the real Bret today and the real Bret at 17, that it's Bret of the book, who are both two Brets? What's the difference between them, the main difference?
You mean the difference between the Bret at 59 and the Bret at 17?
Yes.
Oh, huge, vast difference. You change throughout your life. You go through so many metamorphoses. I'm not the same person who wrote American Psycho. I wrote that book at a certain point in my life, and it meant something to me, and it was very vital, and I was obsessed with it, and I was obsessed with Patrick Bateman, and now I would never write that book. So everything changes. There's no way I could write this book when I originally wanted to write it. And I originally wanted to write it when I was like 17 or 18. And I had put Less Than Zero aside to write the shards because the shards just seemed so much more emotionally pressing because so much of it had happened to me in ways that in Less Than Zero it didn't quite. But I realized at a certain point, and very quickly too, after I conjured up the entire story and all the things that happened to me when I was 17 and that I did put into the shards, I realized at 18 I couldn't do it. And throughout the decades, I thought about it, I went to it a couple of times, and it really wasn't until I was about 56, 57 that the book began speaking to me. It began announcing itself to me. The characters that I thought of, real people, my friends, my lovers, when I was 17, reappeared. And, you know, that's how it works with a book. You do not sit down one day and say, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write a book called Less Than Zero, or I'm going to write American Psycho. Months of feeling, months of emotion, months of thinking about who is this narrator that's going to encapsulate and reflect the pain that I'm feeling and the distraction and the confusion I'm feeling. And really, from all of these emotions, a book starts announcing itself. Mm-hmm. And then a narrator begins to appear. And then through that narrator, then a storyline appears because of who that narrator is. And that's just how I've always worked. With the shards, for example, when I was, I think, 18 when I wanted to write it, the entire thing was laid out. I had the plot laid out. I had everything laid out. All of the characters, all of the incidents that I drew up at 18 are in this book. That has not changed at all. But when I was writing it the first time, I was writing it in the Less Than Zero style, that kind of flat, effectless minimalism that I was so into at that age.
Give me an example.
An example is, if anyone has read this novel, the first chapter, for example, which was, I'm driving to the stables to see Debbie's horse. I'm still hungover from the cocaine I did last night. Blondie is on the stereo, and I feel very hungover from the cocaine I did last night. And then I see Debbie standing. It was like that.
That were the Bret from...
It was the numb kind of quality of Clay's narration in Less Than Zero. And I realized this book had so many characters, so many things happening. There was a plot. There was a story. I couldn't handle it at 18. And I also couldn't be as honest as I wanted to be about how I felt about these real life people. Less Than Zero I could do. Less Than Zero was about 200 pages. Less Than Zero was a feeling, a vibe, a kind of hangout novel. There wasn't much of a plot. It was what I wanted to capture in Less Than Zero was this aesthetic that I was so interested in and that I talk about in the shards, numbness. Mm-hmm. Numbness as a feeling. And in the late 70s, early 80s, this was announcing itself in so many places, in advertising, in new wave music, in videos, in certain movies. I located this idea that affectlessness, this sort of bored attitude, was actually a feeling, and it was as legitimate as happiness or sadness. I know it sounds sort of like numbness is feeling. That seems to contradict itself, but it didn't for me. And I wondered, how could I get that feeling that I was experiencing on the page? Who was this narrator? What was this book going to be like? And so I went back to Less Than Zero, and the shards just kind of disappeared for 40 years.
So Bret at 17 wanted that numbness that you are saying.
Yes, which I write about a lot in the shards. I write about writing Less Than Zero because I was writing Less Than Zero in 17. And the shards is, despite the fact that, yes, there's a serial killer, yes, there's a slasher teen killer element to it as well, and there's a murder mystery and a crime drama to it, there is much of it that is about things that I've been wanting to write for 40 years. Real things, about real people.
Yes.
You know, their names are changed, of course, but real people. And I merged the two together. So I merged the Stephen King novel, for example, that I wanted to write at
Shining.
18, Yeah, any kind of Stephen King novel.
Okay.
I mean, The Shards was a very scary title for me at 18, and now to me it's a very sad title. It's about like putting together the pieces of your past that you can't really fully do. You can try, but you really can't do it. Even as a writer, you can't do it. But at 18, I thought The Shards was like scary. They're like knives. They're like these sharp things, and they really injure you. And now it takes on another meaning. But the door that opened The Shards for me was the fact that I was always getting it wrong. That this should never have been narrated in present tense by a 17-year-old, just documenting the things that were happening. And when I realized, and I wrote the first 2 paragraphs, this was sometime in April of 2020, when for months these characters had been haunting me. All of these characters, all of my friends were haunting me. I was older, and they were haunting me. And I was thinking about being
hunting
17.
you as younger.
What?
Hunting you as younger people. As younger.
Yeah, as younger people. And I couldn't get them out of my mind. And I was afraid I was going to get into a car accident because I was talking to them in my head while I was driving around. And this pressure kept building to like finally sit down and write this book. And then, of course, lockdown happened. And the pandemic happened. And everything shut down. And we were locked in our apartment. And, you know, it just, whatever, gave you the opportunity to open the wine a little earlier and go on the internet, which I never did. And I started looking for these people. Many of them had no social media at all. People in their late 50s, mid-50s, they just didn't have Instagram. They didn't have Facebook. That haunted me, too, that I couldn't find out where they were. And then also all of the places that we hung out. All of the places from 1981, the movie theaters, the shopping malls, the coffee shops, the nightclubs, they're all gone. And no one curated them, like now. No one took a million pictures so I could just go onto the internet and find the Sherman Oaks Galleria. The Sherman Oaks Galleria, the hot red center of youth life in America, where we hung out often. There's nothing on the internet. There's maybe 2 or 3 photos. And I wanted to, there's a scene where one student is stalking another through the Galleria, and I wanted to remember exactly what the second concourse, there are 3 floors, the second concourse, what those stores were. I knew Licorice Pizza was at the end of one, and I knew a bookstore was at the end of the other, but I wanted to know all of them, and I couldn't find it anywhere, and I have an IT guy. I have an IT guy because I'm old. And I need help a lot. And he's really good. I mean, he does deep dives. He goes into the dark ends of the internet. And he said, I couldn't find anything. And then he said, just watch Fast Times at Ridgemont High. They all work in the Galleria. The whole credit sequence takes place in the Galleria. And then I did, and then I realized where everyone was. I'm just rambling right now about writing this book, but you have something specific you wanted to say?
Yeah, I wanted to say that in Portuguese, the title of the book is Estilhaços. It's published in Asa, Chancela da Leia. And we have here Bret at 17 with all his friends and friends and lovers and I don't know, much more people, killers and something much more things. You mentioned that you are looking for the old LA. Did you enter in some kind of nostalgia when you were trying to write or in the process of writing this novel? Because I guess the tone, you have some nostalgic tone crossing the book.
Oh, well, we all get there. We all get to the point where we start looking at our youth in a way that we didn't before, and I think I was at that age. And I think there's a lot of artists who get to an age and they want to go back to their childhood and they want to understand how they got from here to here to here. I think Quentin Tarantino, who has been on my podcast and I'm friends with, said that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It wasn't specifically about his childhood, but it took place in the world of his childhood. And he wanted to go back there and create, and we were both haunted by cults, the Manson murders, and we were the same age. We both grew up in LA, and those murders really impacted a generation for, decades, for decades. And he wanted to resolve that. I have a cult in my book that's not quite the Manson murders, the Manson cult, but there is a cult. And there were cults all over LA. There were serial killers. And I did want to go back to that world in 1981. Maybe it was because 2020 was so terrible, and it seemed like 1981 was so innocent in some degree, and maybe that was what was attractive about it to me. But I do think like there are artists, a lot of film artists like Quentin Tarantino, Fellini with Armacord, Alfonso Cuarón with Roma. I mean, they go back. Ingmar Bergman with Fanny and Alexander. They go back in time and they want to write about this time in their life to figure out how they became the adult they became, or whatever the reason is. But nostalgia was a big reason why I wanted to write this book. And I think that happens to an artist at a certain age. I don't think I could have ever written this book at any other age, nor would I have wanted to.
And you are well with that, the nostalgic way of looking to your world as a teenager.
Oh, I wanted to. Oh, yeah, I wanted to. It was a force. It was a force that I could not get rid of. It was a pressure. And so, yeah, I remember that one night in April 2020, we were about 3 weeks into the lockdown. And as I said, I was looking for my friends, and then I started listening to the music from that period on YouTube. And all of these things started coming back to me. I couldn't find the original outline that I had done in my papers. I couldn't find it, but I remembered the story pretty well. And then I wrote 2 paragraphs. I wrote 2 paragraphs, I think it was on a Thursday night, and they were the first 2 paragraphs that opened the book. And I realized, wait a minute, these 2 paragraphs are written from the viewpoint of someone my age, not someone 17. That's the door that opened everything.
The voice was there.
Yeah, the voice was there. And the voice was not of a 17-year-old, but of a 57-year-old. And that allowed me to really fill in the story in ways that I always wanted to, but never could figure out how. And now that I was 57, I also felt vulnerable. And I also felt much more honest. And I also felt much more compassionate about these people that I somewhat felt, over-emotional about or overly adolescent about, and realized that I wanted to portray them not with the coldness that I was doing in Lesson Zero, but with an incredibly different emotional tone.
You write this book. This book is written in the first person. Bret, the I, me, Bret, you, Bret. And there is called an autofiction. You have changed the names of your friends, and I can, if you read the book, you can understand why you did that. What do you feel about this definition of autofiction, and how do you put your book in that category of fiction?
No, other people put that book in, this
Yes.
book in that. I don't even
You
care
don't do
about
that.
autofiction. I don't even know really what it is. I guess I know what it is, but it's something that I'm not interested in exploring. When I looked at this book finally at 57, I realized Clay was not going to be narrating this, even as an old man, that it was going to be me, and that I had to write about this from my point of view, because it was so autobiographical at points. And it would make no sense to name the character Kevin or Jack or make up a narrator for this. And that's why it came so easily to me. This notion of autofiction seems to be over-intellectualized at times. And for me, that's not why I write a novel. The novel, as I was talking about, came from pure emotion. It came from things I was feeling rather than things that, I guess, in a weird way, I was thinking, like, okay, I'm going to do an autofiction version of this. Never thought about that. So none of that comes into play.
I read some reviews that compared you with Nausgaard or Annie Ernaux or even Ben Lerner, that I know that you are a friend of. How do you feel about these comparisons?
I don't really feel anything. I don't really know what to feel about that. It's very.
You
it's-
read you read Nausgaard? You read any other
I read the
book?
first 3 volumes of My Struggle. I tried to read the horror novel, The Morning
Yes.
Stars. What
Yes,
was it
yes,
called?
I don't know, it
Yeah, I
stars
tried to read
everything.
that. I liked the first 2 or 3 volumes of My Struggle, and then I got to volume 4, and it just seemed to be the same thing over and over again. I admired the ambition of it and what he was trying to do, and I still do. But at a certain point, it no longer interested me by, I don't know, the 1600th page or whatever I was on volume 4.
Your volume is in Portuguese version 600 and something pages.
Yeah, that's about the same length of volume 1 of Nausgaard.
Yeah.
So imagine 4 of those, 4 shards,
Yes.
let alone 1.
This is also we can read this also as a book of rights formation of a writer. You are trying to look to your voice as a writer, as you are writing zero, less than zero, and you are also looking for what's the meaning of your life at that point. You were a privileged kid in a privileged school with a privileged kind of life, but there is some anguish in you about your identity.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, yes, the older I've gotten, the more I've appreciated the privilege that I grew up with. I always wrote books where I glamorized it and criticized it. Glamorized it and criticized it. Wrote about it realistically, yet also being part of it, being an insider, I could find the flaws, the cracks, and criticize it at the same time as I was writing about it. And I think that's evident in American Psycho and Less Than Zero and Rules of Attraction. That was kind of what I liked to do, because there were flaws and it wasn't all great, you know. So in this book, I think in this book, it's just very particular to being 17, to being a teenager at that time. One of the driving engines of this book is that Bret is a writer who has not been able to control his superpower. It's like the origin stories in Marvel movies. You know, you have to control the superpower to then move on. And I was writing Less Than Zero, and I was I don't know what I was. I embellished everything. I was a liar. I was a gossip. I was a fabulist as a person. And my writing life had gotten out of control, and I was an actor. I was wearing a mask. I was the boyfriend of the most popular girl in our senior class, but I was gay. I was having sex with 2 other boys who were on the down low, as they say. No one was out in 1981. And there was also another thing that made me very angry at 17 when I realized that my straight friends, my straight male friends, many of whom I had crushes on, had a much more open world available to them than I did as a gay man. That they had 97, 98% of the women available to them. I had 2% of the men. Songs weren't written for me. Movies weren't made about what I wanted. Books weren't written for what I wanted. I realized that my world was in some ways very, very limited compared to my straight counterparts, and that made me, at 17, quite angry. I had learned I was gay at a very early age. I didn't care. I've never thought gay was my identity. I was always a writer. I loved music. I loved books. I loved that. That's my identity. Being gay is not my identity. I'm not one of those people. And I could deal with it. But at 17, for some reason, there was a limitation to it that pissed me off, and I got angry about it. And then I went to college, and it was gone. But that is the driving machine in the book, because the book is also about obsession,
Yes.
lust that turns to murder, and it is a reflection of where I was at 17. All of the drama, all of the betrayal, all of the mystery that happens in this book is kind of at the core of Bret's identity and Bret's resentment of having to be this person, having to be this actor, not being able to express himself. He's playing this role. He's pretending to just go along with the crowd. And that ends up causing a lot of problems.
Yes.
A lot of problems in this book are caused by Bret.
We don't talk about that problems, but we can talk about the things that are here connected to that problems. Can we talk about sex? Because this is a book about sex.
It's a book about being 17 and a boy. I don't think it's a book about sex. I mean, I was very horny at 17.
Sex was
I
important.
masturbated a lot, and I write about it in the book. And then people are so shocked now. They said if I had read one more jack-off scene in the Shards, I was going to throw it across the room. And I cut out half of them. So I don't know. So yes, there's a lot of masturbation. There's a lot of fantasy. And there, it was 17. I did have these two boys that I was seeing, and I had a voracious, beautiful girlfriend who wanted to have sex a lot. And so I wrote about this all as honestly as possible. It's not idealized in any way. I mean, the sex between Bret and Debbie, who was really...
Debbie is his girlfriend.
My girlfriend, Debbie Schaefer, I call her in the book. I mean, I write about it as honestly as I could. There were times when I couldn't get it up, and I wrote about that, and I wrote about how I had to fantasize about boys to fulfill whatever I was supposed to fulfill, and I talked about the porn that I watched, mostly all straight porn, because I didn't want my friends, my straight male friends, to know yet that I was gay, so I was watching straight porn to understand kind of what to do with women.
Techniques.
That was my education in terms of like, okay, this is what you do. You put your finger here and your mouth here and whatever. But to me, this is not a book about sex. It really is a book about experience. And at 17, I think there are a lot of men probably in this audience, no matter what age they are now, look back at that time of their life and really desire and wanting to fuck and looking at girls and it overcrowding your hormone-filled mind is a giant part of being a teenager. And I think in many ways I've been taken to task by some people. People got so prude. How did people get so prude in terms of like being sort of offended?
Of any generation or?
No. I mean, I think when I finally went on Goodreads. I'd never been in Goodreads before. Someone said, check out the reviews on the Shards and Goodreads. And I was really shocked. I didn't know about Goodreads. I had no idea what it was. And I saw, the typical things that I've always seen on Amazon. 5-star, 1-star, 5-star, 1-star. I did not know what DNF meant. Did not finish.
Okay.
And I thought, this is interesting. And then I also noticed that there was a lot of people who were grossed out by too much sex, too much sexual descriptions, too much masturbation. Well, I don't know. Within a 600-page book, I don't think there really is as much as they're saying. Other things take over, and the sex in the beginning of the book, it moves more into a mystery, crime, serial killer novel rather than just a group portrait of adolescent, of about 5 or 6 friends who Bret thinks are going to break apart completely because of this new guy that comes to school. And he's very suspicious of this new guy. He's also in love with him. He falls in love with him because he's so gorgeous. But this new guy, Bret is very suspicious of and thinks that he's going to break up their group, this tightly knit group. And he does.
Robert Mallory.
Bret was right. Bret was right about Robert Mallory.
Yeah.
And so he begins to imagine a timeline with Robert and the serial killer that's haunting L.A., called the Trawler. And he notices that Robert was in the city before he got to Buckley, when certain girls disappeared, and he begins to build up this case against Robert Mallory. And the other thing is, though...
Like a writer builds a fiction.
But also, though, however, there is a lot of stuff that Bret's right about. Robert was there. Robert did date that girl. So it's not as if Bret makes this up totally. There are enough clues to suggest that Robert actually is the Trawler. And this is also another part of the engine of the novel, and in terms of who really is, who really isn't, is a...
You
You have to
I don't
you
know
have to get through all 600 pages to figure it out.
It really, you must. When you choose to, I don't know if you choose or it imposes you as something like that, but a mystery novel or a crime novel, you wanted to make this fiction, a crime novel, or it imposes you like that because you have this kind of admiration about this genre, the horror and terror. What is the seduction of this kind of books?
Oh, I have no idea. I don't know. It's just something that happened to me. I mean, it was what I was drawn to as a kid. The problem is if you approach this novel as a crime thriller, as a murder mystery, and with everything completely answered and solved, you're going to be very disappointed. This is a book about a group of kids in LA in 1981, and there is this element that slowly starts to zoom in on them. Mm-hmm. But this is not a conventional murder mystery or a conventional thriller in that way. It is more a book about obsession, about being a writer, about being young, about being frustrated, and about wanting to break out of a world that you feel that you really don't fit into, but you have nowhere else to go. It's very much like Patrick Bateman. Mm-hmm. And it was something that I was thinking
American
about.
Psycho.
It reminded me of American Psycho at times because that's Patrick Bateman's story too in American Psycho. He's just following the rules of this world that he doesn't really believe in, but he doesn't know where else to go. And what happens to someone who is forced to do that? Mm-hmm. Well, they go crazy. Mm-hmm. They become psychotic. And so I don't know. But I knew that when I was growing up, like most boys, I was into science fiction, horror comics, graphic novels, things like that. And then I graduated into, the more I read into other writers, that I realized plot and character and story did not matter as much as voice. And that's what happened when I read Ernest Hemingway for the first time at 12 or 13, which blew my mind.
What was the book?
In Our Time and The Sun Also Rises. I had to do a paper on them. I was late with it, and so I had to read both books that night. And I was a fast reader, so I wasn't worried about it. So I started with In Our Time, which is short stories, and I was blown away. It was the light bulb that went off and said, I want to be a writer. I had been reading everything before. I read a lot of bestsellers that my parents had. A story could take me through anything. Clunky writing could take me through anything. You know, I was reading my father's Robert Ludlum books and whatever my mom was reading. I read The Godfather when I was like 8. The Exorcist, Jaws, all of these big commercial books. But when I read Hemingway, there was this sudden shift of focus, and that was, it's not the story, it's the voice telling the story. And it happened again almost immediately with the American writer Joan Didion, yes, who was being taught at my high school. And 2 of her books were. And I read her, and then that just completely cemented it. It was not the plot. It was not the characters. It was how it was being told. And that changed the way I read ever since.
Yes, and John Didion is here. It's a kind of companion that you have here in a
Well,
in a
because
book.
Because this is autobiographical, and at 17 I was obsessed with her, and I was basing a lot of Lesson Zero on her. I was stealing from her. I was actually stealing from her in terms of the structure of Lesson Zero. The structure of Lesson Zero is very reminiscent of one of her most famous essays, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, and the way she structured that, which is just a first-person response to being in Haight-Ashbury in the summer of 1967. And she doesn't do anything that's overly journalistic. It's kind of the new journalism. She just puts herself in it, and she describes 20 or 30 scenes she sees. She's not editorializing. She's not doing an op-ed. It's just a painting of madness. Mm-hmm. And it's done through style, and it's done through certain details she selects. But she doesn't start out with, there was a madness going on in Haight-Ashbury in 1967, and I was there standing, seeing it. It was like very subtle, and the voice mattered so much. The voice contained the meaning of what she was trying to express, not the actual events.
Mm-hmm. There is a passage here, I guess it's very curious, when you compare the style of Joan Didion with the style of Kim Wilde singing Kids in America, with that kind of numbness that you are looking for.
Well, I was finding it everywhere, and I was finding this numbness, this kind of weird neutrality in so many pop artifacts. And I remember exactly the moment where I watched Kim Wilde sing Kids in America, the famous video of her singing the song, which is like a soaring anthem. It's like, it's so hooky, it's so poppy. It moves in from these minor chord verses into these major chord choruses, and the video is of her just looking kind of beautiful and numb, and it's a blue light on her face, and she's singing the song. And when she gets to the chorus, her face doesn't change. It's still dead. It's still just looking. And it was like, oh, wow, that's like Susan Reynolds. That's like some girls
Susan
that
Reynolds
I know.
is a friend of Bret.
Susan Reynolds was a friend of mine who I took a lot of my aesthetic cues from. She was just the ultimate of cool. She was just a very cool girl. And I was noticing this more and more in like advertising and as I said, in a lot of cultural artifacts. And that's what made me want to write Less Than Zero. I mean, Kim Wilde was an inspiration. Kids in America was an inspiration for it. And I write about that in the book too.
Yeah. Music is very, very present here in the novel. I guess there is some 10 or 12 soundtracks made by...
on Spotify, I know. I couldn't believe it. These people are making all these Spotify playlists. I didn't even know, I didn't count how many songs are in it, but I guess like 180 to 200 songs. And so there's all these Spotify playlists, which get some stuff wrong. I think these people just put their own songs in anyway that they liked. And then they use different versions of songs. Like, I love this song by a group named B Movie called Nowhere Girl that I played all the time. It was kind of this minor key, very eerie, new wave dance track. And I listened to it all the time driving around the hills of California, of Los Angeles. And I write about this in the book. But everyone is putting like the bad version with the synthers. The short version, they're not using the piano one that I like. I'm being so super specific now, but anyway. But yes, I was amazed that so many Spotify playlists, people made them for this.
But music is very important here. It has something to do with a trigger to memory, or it's a kind of wallpaper. I don't know. What is the role of music here in the book? I guess for a 17 young man, a 17 guy, music in the beginning of 80s, it was very important. But
it's important to everybody.
Very important here in the book.
No. It's important to everybody at 17. When you look back at your life, it really is the music of your adolescence, of 14, 15 to about 20, 21. That's the most impactful music. That's when you're most open to it. And you talk to anybody, they will say, what was the best music of your life? And they will go back to those years.
So what is the best music?
That was 1981. It was 1980, 81, 79. All those years were far more. I can remember all of those albums and all of those songs in ways that I can't quite remember my favorite songs when I was 32 or 34. But when I was at 17, I knew every song that was out, and they were important to me. I was open to so much more than I was later. Mm-hmm. And they affected me emotionally. And re-listening to some of them now, when I wanted to put them in the book, they had different meanings. Mm-hmm. They had very different meanings to me at 57 than they did at 17. And I don't know. It was a moment. It was a moment to realize how much I had invested in these songs at 17 and how I interpreted them at 17, and then seeing them now at 57, I felt kind of naive in many ways about the importance of them and what they were saying to me, what they were speaking to, how they were speaking to me.
There is a song, Ice House, that you mention many times here in the book, and you are listen to Ice House, and you are comparing the way that you interpret that song, and Susan is interpreting that song, and in the end of the book, it came also Ice House. What is your relation with that music?
Look, this is a song by an Australian band. It was called Ice House. I don't know if anyone remembers Ice House or knows what Ice House is. They had a couple of hits during the 80s. They tried to make them very big in America. It never really happened. But their first album released here had a couple of songs on it, and one of them was called Ice House. The band was called Ice House. Their first song on their first record here was called Ice House. It's a very eerie ballad. And also an example of that numbness, because it too has a minor chord verse and then bursts into a major chord chorus. And it's very exciting, and it's very emotional, and you're very into it and caught up into it. And it does the best things that a pop song does. It makes you both happy and sad, you know? Having that great combination of giving you an ache, but yet also making you happy, or happy that you have that ache, you know? But there's a section in the book where, yes, I talk about Ice House. I've been wanting to write about Ice House, and now I have my chance in the shards to write about this particular song and how it affected one or two of my friends.
And the role of movies, it's another thing that is crucial for your formation as a young adult, as an adolescent, and I guess as you as a writer also. Here we see you going to the movies with your friends, talking about movies. Also compare the movie theater to a temple, a religious temple. Can you tell us a little bit about this connection between your books and you as a movie spectator, and this idea of I don't know, refuge?
No, it wasn't that necessarily. It was the fact that me and my friends grew up in the 70s, and there were masterpieces released every week. And so we were seeing movies that became Hollywood classics, whether it was Apocalypse Now, Alien, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, Carrie, I mean, just The Deer Hunter. I mean, every Days of Heaven. I mean, it was this moment where every weekend that we went to the movies, we saw the new Hollywood, the great films of the new Hollywood. And going to movies was like a big event, because the movies were so good. And they were, and I don't know necessarily if younger viewers now see going to the movies like that, but we were seeing just like even flawed films that were, that were just so ambitious, Blade Runner or John Carpenter's The Thing, or whatever the movies were. It just seemed like there were great films after great films being released and made by the studio system, and so I think at a certain point, when I'm writing about this, there's a scene where Bret goes to see The Shining the first weekend it opens in 1980. And the most remarkable thing to me about, and it's everything about going to see The Shining in this was completely true, completely autobiographical, down to what I knew I was wearing, the songs I was listening to in the car, which was Joe Jackson and The Clash and Elvis Costello, to what I got at the concession stand was a box of Junior Mints. But the most remarkable thing when I was writing this scene, and I was remembering going to see that movie, because it really is the beginning of the book. Bret sees a boy at The Shining, and that is the engine that starts propelling the book forward. But everyone comments on this line where I was about 20 minutes early, and I just sat in the seat, and the movie was going to start at 10 a.m. It was an early morning show. It was 9:40. I took my seat. I had my candy, and I just thought about things. I didn't have a phone. I looked around the theater. I thought about my friends. I thought about that this guy I liked. I thought about, should I go buy that record after The Shining's done? It was just sort of like remarkable to be able to sit there and contemplate your life and contemplate things rather than looking at a phone. And I was kind of shocked when I was writing that, going, God, I did all those movies where I sat waiting for the movie to happen. I didn't have a phone to look at in the darkness of the theater. So, which is unheard of now. I mean, if I go to the movies, I mean, I'm looking at my phone during the previews, the trailers. So it's like, and sometimes during the movie I am as well, if it's not particularly good.
What was the last movie that you saw?
The last movie I saw in a theater?
Yes.
I only saw 4 movies in a theater this year. I saw the Mission Impossible movie. I saw Oppenheimer. I saw the Wes Anderson movie, Asteroid City. And I saw Barbie, which I loved. That was my favorite out of those 4. I much preferred Barbie over Oppenheimer.
Why?
Because it was playful, it was hilarious, it was so much smarter than I thought it was going to be. I really went in with no expectations. My boyfriend wanted to see it. I really didn't even want to see it. And I was completely surprised how charming it was, how touching it was, how it was not this, the conservatives tried to paint it as this overly woke picture that was misandrous. Did you say that? Filled with misandry, hatred of men, the opposite of misogyny.
Yeah.
And so, and it's not at all, because Ken is the most sympathetic person in the movie. And Ryan Gosling was great. I love the I'm Just Ken song. The whole thing was like a perfectly orchestrated piece
Even
of
the
pop
soundtrack?
movie. Yeah, the soundtrack, yeah. So if you're asking me the movies I saw in a theater this year, those were the 4. I don't really go to the theaters anymore. I've been too bummed out by too many bad movies, and also it's very easy to stream, and a lot of theaters closed during the pandemic, and they're not around me anymore. So it's just like I've got to really want to see something or have the time to drive all the way to the theater to see it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This book also took us to a time that is a kind of a changing time. The end of 70s, beginning of 80s, Reagan is elected. You don't care about politics, but Reagan is there. And we have that kind of literalidad. Literal, how you say that? It's the time for not metaphoric, the time that it's again metaphors. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It's okay. So the thing is, when you wrote White, you talked about this time doesn't support the metaphor. That time began, I guess, in that period, 1981, when Reagan won the election. The America started to change as a place to say whatever we want to say, as you wrote in White about the Trump's years, and I wanted to go to that go back to that period, 1981, 1980, to because that is the period of the book, and it took us to a kind of changing time. It's not only you that are growing up being an adult, but it's the time that are changing. I'm not.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah?
I think maybe this is true. The Shards takes place in 1981. The 80s really hadn't started. The 70s were ending. That's how I look at 1981. 82, that's the year that I believe the 80s really started. I think they didn't really begin until then. And we were still left with a lot of remnants of the 70s in 1980 and 81. And then 82 was the year where we really began to feel the ascendancy of Reagan, and the 80s began to change and began to become a reaction against the nihilism of the 1970s, the negativity of the 1970s. Culture changed, movies changed. Movies radically changed from the 1980s to the popular movies of the 1970s, which were all very dark, nihilistic movies with unhappy endings that were also big hits, and were about a lot of problems in America, and conspiracy movies. And then the 80s were, there were some great movies, but it was a much lighter era with the big blockbusters. Were not The Godfather or The Godfather Part 2, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or The Deer Hunter, or Network, or whatever. It was Back to the Future. It was E.T. It was Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. There was a kind of fantasy element that was pushed to the forefront. Of course, Star Wars started that in 1977, but it really became the only language during the 80s when the business changed. This might not be the best example, but I was so invested in movies that maybe for me that is the best example. But what was the question again?
Is a time that was changing.
Metaphor. The times are always changing.
Yeah.
They're always changing, as Bob Dylan told us.
Yes.
I mean, the times are always changing. So
in a year we have an election in U.S. Didn't know?
Did I know this?
No.
Oh, you mean like next year? There's
Next
like an
year.
election coming up.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Yes.
guess there is. I try not to watch the news, so I'm always surprised to be reminded that, oh my God, there is an election coming up.
You are suspicious about news.
Well, in our country, it is very difficult to fully believe the news. And it is sad to live in a country where something like 80 to 90% of people do not believe the news the media is telling them. They think it's slanted, there's an angle to it, that there's a narrative that they're pushing, and that the media and the government, and especially in the last 5 years, big pharma have all have conglomerated, have become this conglomerate, and are pushing stories and pushing narratives. And it's very hard to live in a society where you see this happening. And people were triggered by a lot of things in, I guess, post-Trump. I guess 2015, 2016. I know everyone I know was angry. Everyone I know was upset. My boyfriend was. I was. About a lot of different things, not the same things. There was a divide. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about angry, I talk about angry on both sides.
Yes.
Okay. So everyone got involved, and I wrote a book called White, which was about the aftermath of Trump, Generation X, the notion of freedom of expression, and how for Gen X it changed radically from being a very free, very open society where we wanted to be offended. We liked being offended. We liked offensive comedy,
Generation
offensive
X.
movies. That's what, yeah. And then being told to shut up, that you can't tell a joke, that you'll be thrown out of school if you say this or that. We just don't get it. And that's why I think Gen X is probably 10 to 12, on the polls I read, more conservative than boomers or millennials, or because that freedom that they had was stripped away from them in a way that millennials were used to and boomers just kind of didn't care about. So, or cared about, but it didn't affect them as much as Gen X did. There is an election coming up. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what to say about it. Yeah. I think it's remarkable that we have both Trump and Biden looking like they're going to be the two candidates. I mean, we're living, 2020 all over again.
You didn't vote in last election?
I don't vote. I don't talk about politics. I don't vote. I'm in the majority of my country. I don't vote. And if you don't vote, you don't complain. And that's always been my mantra. If you don't vote, you can't complain about what happens. And I also live in California, which is, rest assured, super liberal, and it doesn't really matter. Your vote, unfortunately, guys, in California, does not matter. It is overwhelmingly going to go one way. So you can make your little statement about yourself and but it's just impractical to me. Mm-hmm.
There is a scene here in the book that we can say, or your friends told you, that is the big trauma for you. It must be the big trauma, the scene with the Hollywood producer that you wish that would give you a space and an offer to make a work to a film movie, to Hollywood, and he wanted sex with you. And the things that are behind this is that scene, it was very traumatic to you, and reading it now with all the Me Too and all the things that happened in Hollywood with that kind of situations, what is your comments about this?
Two totally different generations, two totally different times. I have a friend who's a 57-year-old woman who said to me when she was trying to be an actress in 1981, if only she knew that she could give the producer a blowjob, she would have done it to get the part, rather than go through 2 months of humiliating auditions. That's Gen X, okay? I met an older producer at a party, and I write about this in the Shards. I had a really lame idea for a movie. He was very interested in it. I was 17, and he invited me to his hotel room at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and I knew something was up about it, but I thought my great movie was going to be made by him. He was a very powerful producer, and instead it ended up in being sex. Now, it was not wanted, but it was semi-consensual. I didn't want to do it, but I thought I was going to get a screenwriting gig. So I went along with it. And it was not the trauma of my teenage years. The trauma of my teenage years was unrequited love. That killed me. That is what really hurt. Getting blown by an old producer in some motel room, that's nothing. That's growing up. You know, that's just growing up. Oh, okay, well, my lame screenplay idea, all he wanted to do was suck me off. I mean, so that was not the trauma. And then when you tell a younger audience this, they go, oh, he's denying it. He's denying it. He should have called the police. We should have called the police on this perpetrator. It wasn't that. It was just the world of adults, and that's what it was like.
And you wanted to be an adult with 17.
Everyone wanted to be an adult in 1981. No one wanted to be a 42-year-old man wearing a Thor costume at Comic-Con. That was not what we were thinking about at all. We were looking at being adults because the entire world we grew up in was run by adults, created by adults. It was an adult world. There was not 100 Disney channels on. I never had my mother once ask me, oh, honey, what do you want? You want this for dinner? Should we show you this? Do you want to watch Frozen again? Is it what you want? Nothing. Nothing. All the movies were for adults. We watched those movies. Our parents were like, Mom, I'm going out. I'm going to drive my bike over to Randy's, okay? Well, I'll be back before dark, okay? That was it. No one tracked us. We were left to our own devices. And I think in many ways that helped us want to become adults. We wanted to get out of childhood. We wanted to get out of the nothingness of childhood in a way and enter into the world of sex and careers and going to parties and being an adult or whatever the adult world was. We didn't want to stay children forever. We didn't want to stay in that bubble. We wanted to leave it. It was stifling for us. So on one level, I mean, people say, oh, your parents were so inattentive and they were not there for you all the time. And no, they weren't. But I don't think that's the key problem for any of us. I don't think that was like a major problem. I think it was something that helped us grow up. And no one was thinking about it like that, you know? Mm-hmm. We could kind of take care of ourselves. And we learned to take care of ourselves. And we grew up pretty fast. I mean, I hate to be that person, but it's true. When I look back at 1981, not a single person I knew was on meds. There were no meds. Meds were not dispensed like candy, like they now are. There was no school shootings. There was no obesity problems. There was no suicide rates. The suicide rates for young people was nothing, like 0.5% and it shot up 50,000% from 1981 to 2021. The suicide rate among teenagers. Mm-hmm. So, honestly, if I'm looking back, 1981 was a lot better than 2021. Mm-hmm. So I think going back to what you originally asked, in a lot of ways, yes, there was this feeling in 2021, which I'm sure we all felt, that this was a kind of terrible time, and that I especially was feeling that and wanted to go back to 1981.
So you can go there with the shards. We can go back to 1981
and get it out of my system. And I'm glad I did. I'm not nostalgic for it anymore. It was something I had to write. I had to make peace with a lot of things that happened to me then. And I did it, and like with all of my books, it helps me move on.
And you say here that you wish to love this book in the end. Do you still love this book? Or in love with this book?
I am in love with a book when I'm writing it. Yes, it is my best friend. It is my lover. It's hard to be the spouse of a writer, I think, when they're really into a novel, when they're really into writing something. It takes over your life. And so you do love it. And then it's over. The affair is over. And then you move on. And you look back on it fondly. And that's just the nature of it. I do know that if I reread this, and I haven't for a while, but I had to give some readings in, I don't know, London, wherever. I noticed that I started self-editing while I was saying it loud. Like there's already things I wanted to change.
It's a temptation.
And that's a problem. Like I can't read Lesson Zero now. I just want to like rewrite the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
we can try to guess with the real Bret here, with the real facts here, what is invented. But the names of your friends are invented, but the friends are real, I guess. They recognize themselves here. What is that kind of challenge?
I haven't heard from any of them. I've only heard from one. I haven't heard from any of these people. I don't think any of them want to read a 600-page book about me. I really don't. The only person was Debbie Schaefer, my girlfriend. She read it, and she got in touch with me.
Oh my.
And we had dinner, and she was fine with it. She couldn't believe I remembered certain things that went on between us.
Very detailed things.
Yeah, no. Well, a couple of sex scenes. She said, I can't remember that. I can't believe you remember that. You know, and I said, well, I wrote about them afterwards. I kept a journal. I kept a journal about us. And, no. So I don't really think any of these people that I write about, who I have not seen in decades, I don't think they're going to come forward. I think that's one of the sad things about the book, and I think there's something very sad about the final scene in the book, because, you know, we were all so important to each other during those high school years. It's such an intense moment of friendships, and there's a scene near the end, I'm not going to spoil it, where two high school friends meet up about 20 years later and have a conversation, and it's just kind of cold and dead, and whatever their closeness was at 17 is just not the same at 35, and they realize this, and that's kind of reality.
Yeah.
A kind of reality, a kind of sad reality.
We don't want to stop with this sad
So
feeling.
ask me something happy then.
I guess that we can pass to the audience. And they
Sure.
must have happy questions.
You still have a journal, or is something of the
Podcast. My podcast. My podcast is my journal. So if anybody wants to know what I'm thinking about or what's
Bret
going
Easton
on,
Ellis.
it's my public journal. But I do not keep a journal anymore. I haven't kept a journal since high school. High school was the last time I kept a journal.
You and Donna Tartt had a very intertwined history. Do you think that the similar themes that both your famous novels talk about are due to a level of interdependence, perhaps?
I don't know. I mean, I think a lot has been made about Donna Tartt and my relationship. We were not that close. We were not close friends. And I think I helped her professionally with A Secret History, which is why she dedicated it to me. But I did not do any editing or helping her with that book at all, except I just gave it to the right people, and it saved about 10 months of her life trying to get that book published someplace. I got it done in like a week. and because I loved the book. I was the first person to read the book, and she was showing it to me constantly. But that didn't mean that we were exactly close friends. I don't know. We were definitely in the same writing workshops in college. She was certainly the best writer of those workshops. She was the most mature, and she really had found a voice in a way that no one else had found a voice. And I was always impressed by her. But I haven't spoken to Donna Tartt in 10 years. I mean, I hadn't even emailed with her since 2013. So I don't know. I think we're very, very different writers. I know she hated American Psycho, and that there are books of mine that she, in terms of what she finds important in fiction, I didn't necessarily, and kind of vice versa. So I don't know. I don't know how comparable we really are. I would assume that The Shards is more her thing than, though she did write me, she liked Lunar Park a lot. She said that was her favorite book of mine. But I don't think Less Than Zero is her thing either. She liked an old-fashioned kind of Dickensian novel. She was always writing even those in her short stories. And she was absolutely against minimalism, which was very big on campuses in the early 80s. And she was always, and you can look at her books, she's a maximalist, you know. She was really writing big books with big stories and, you know, being Dickensian. So I don't really have that kind of affinity with Donna Tartt, no.
I saw your movie. I saw the movie, The American Psycho, in 2000, before reading the book. What very impressed me was a scene there where Ronald Reagan admitting that he lied to the American people. And then I saw that in the book you start with April's Fool, and now you're back in 1981, which I think is the year. Well, Jimmy Carter lost the elections in 1980, and the year 1981 started with the Ronald Reagan inauguration, releasing the hostage in Iran. So it really marked the landmark till today, still having the effect of that 1981. Do you think that 1981 was the year that started lies in the world? We are now having a big lie, everything is fake news and all the things. You also made a fake news when you did the article for Vanity Fair, right, in the beginning. Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know if I was old enough to even really realize that. I write about January of 1981 in The Shards. I write about going to the Super Bowl with my dad and Tom Wright and his father in the Louisiana Superdome.
Yeah.
And the hostages had just been released, and it was a big thing. There were yellow ribbons everywhere about the hostages. But again, as I write in The Shards, we were just too young, and the Times did not ask young people to be political. We were not. I remember, and I write about this also, that we were mostly members of a beach club, the most exclusive beach club in Los Angeles that was anti-black, anti-Jew, no woman could join. It was made up of white men. And we didn't even really think of this or consider it because 1981 wasn't asking us to. And so we would go to the beach club knowing that it was all these things, but that it was also kind of a joke, and that it was absurd that it was, but we were still going to go to the beach club. You know, we weren't in this moment where we were going to take a stance against the sexism, the racism, and the anti-Semitism of the beach club. Now, of course, the beach club is not that. I think it's still around, and it is open to all races, and women can become members and all this stuff. But it was something that I did want to point out there. But I don't think, getting back to your question, I don't know if that's when the lying started and the whatever, in the media. I would assume growing up, I really did trust the media to a degree up until about 2015. And then that's when everything went off a cliff, at least for me as a grizzled Gen Xer, after paying attention to mainstream news outlets. I started to see angles were being taken, sides were being taken. There was no neutrality. And the mainstream media was getting, and it has for the last 10 years, gotten so many huge stories completely wrong. and given out really terrible misinformation. So I do not pay attention to the American mainstream media. It's just not, it's too opinionated.
What about the Golden Suicides? Is that still on the table?
Golden Suicides he's asking about. It was a script of mine that was the script that came closest to being made, my best script, and it's a dead project. So it's, yeah, the story was about, based on a true story about a young couple, real people who were, it was kind of like A Star is Born set in the art world, where a older woman, in this case, who was an art star, falls in love with a much younger, up-and-coming painter. And they fall in love, and then she gets the opportunity to go out to Hollywood to make a movie because of her shorts, and she signs a 2-picture deal with 20th Century Fox. That could happen in the 90s. Because if you were, she created CD-ROMs. And because of the CD-ROMs, do you know what a CD-ROM is? Because of her CD-ROMs, she got a 2-picture deal at Fox. And of course, the movie never got made, and she went insane. She went insane in Hollywood, because that's what happens in Hollywood. Hollywood makes you crazy, and you have to like. And
You've
so
been
anyway,
there for how many years?
what?
You've been there for how many years?
Yes, so I know it. So anyway, she went crazy, and then he loved her so much, and his career was rising. He was becoming very famous, but he was so in love with her that he went crazy too. And he started getting as paranoid as she was. She killed herself, and then a week later, he killed herself. I know, a very happy movie, a holiday movie, a Christmas movie. It's a true story. It's a true story. We bought the rights for Vanity Fair, optioned the rights, wrote the script. So many people were interested. We had Ryan Gosling, Naomi Watts, Gus Van Sant wanted to direct it, Gaspar Noé wanted to direct it. It was a big, hot property, and then like everything else in Hollywood, it fell apart. So, and it is a dead project because the woman whose article we based it on does not want to option anymore. I wrote a script. The horrible producer who owns the script is not letting the script go. It's a dead project. So, thank you for reminding me of this. It's going to ruin my night now.
Hey, I loved hearing about your cinema experiences and your review of Barbie, and I was wondering what books you've read this year that you loved.
I was really surprised that I loved the book that won the Pulitzer Prize in America called Demon Copperhead. I don't know if it's been published here yet by Barbara Kingsolver.
It's going to be.
Yeah, it's kind of a reimagining of David Copperfield, reset in 1990s Appalachia, which to me sounded terrible, like a terrible idea for a book. And I thought it was going to be so mechanical, but the voice of this boy is remarkable. And so of new books, I really, really liked that. I like an American writer named Emma Cline, who wrote a book called The Girls. She just recently published a book I found interesting called The Guest. And I liked Hernan Diaz's Trust, which also co-won the Pulitzer Prize with Demon Copperhead. I like old novels. I'm reading older novels. I'm reading Edith Wharton now. So I like, and I think part of the reason why the Shards has the shape it has is that I've been obsessed with 19th century historical fiction, and you know, everything from George Eliot to Tolstoy to Dickens to Balzac, these wide panoramic novels that are about large groups of people, but also about the cities they take place in, and I think that the Shards was influenced by that. But those are a couple of the novels lately that I have liked, but I really was mostly impressed with Demon Copperhead.
More questions?
You said before that novels are distilled from emotion, and you've attributed numbness to Less Than Zero. I was wondering if you have clear in your mind what emotion you attribute to your other novels, to Luna Park, American Psycho, The Shards.
All the same, personal, emotional. That's where they all come from. Some of them are more designed. Some of them are more satirical in a way. But they all reflect where I was at a certain point. Glamorama, for example, I wrote during my 30s and, my late 20s into my 30s. And it was a reflection of so many things. It was supposed to be kind of my take on a Gen X international thriller. But during the early parts of the outlining, American Psycho came out, and I became this notorious celebrity. I was never more famous than I was at that point because 32 publishers across the world dropped me. So my picture was everywhere, and I became famous in a way that I had not been famous before. People recognized me on the street or said nasty things to me on the street. And that's when the idea of the novel becoming so much about celebrity, for those of you who've read Glamorama, and also the doubling of someone, of the real person being misinterpreted for someone else. Like I knew what my motives were. I knew what I was. I knew I was not this evil person that was being paraded around in the media, for example. And so that changed, for example, Glamorama. And it just depends on where I am in my life. And so it's always based on personal stuff and stuff that I'm going through, and then a novel appears.
One last question.
Do you think that lockdown was the trigger you needed to write Charles?
Well, it's really funny because my boyfriend and I joked that how did lockdown affect me to the degree that I'm in my office all day anyway? You know, I write from home anyway. I'm in my office all day. So I do think that without the lockdown and without that happening, I don't know if the Shards would have happened because there were other projects, a film project that I was about to direct, we had the financing for, we were about to go do it, and it just completely died for 2-3 years, and it just evaporated. So in some ways, yes, the pandemic and the lockdown was, now looking back, was a positive thing in some ways for me because it allowed me to write The Shards. It was not a good thing for my boyfriend, who became a drug addict again and went crazy and had to go to rehab because we had two completely different lockdown experiences, like I'm sure everybody did.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's quite a note to leave this conversation on.
We can explain this dedicatory to nobody. This book is
yes,
dedicated to nobody.
That's the dedication. It's a dedication I always wanted to use because the book is always for me. I don't write for a reader. I don't write for a publisher. I don't write for a critic. I don't write for anybody but myself. And it would be foolish for me to say that I am writing a book for someone else when in reality I am actually writing it for me. So the for no one thing I could finally use, because I don't know if I'm going to write another book, and this was maybe the final time I could use it. Because it is the truth. Every book should have that, for no one.
Thank you so much, Bret. It
Thank
was a
you.
pleasure.
I guess there is a signing. I will be.
Yes.
I'm taking a very quick break. There's going to be a signing there, and so I will sign whatever books you bring. And I have agreed to take selfies if anybody wants selfies. Just give me a couple minutes, and I'll be out there.
Okay.
All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.